Okay, I'm back. I've got my my little eraser here, and then I kind of redid the board here because I thought what we could do is talk a little bit more about the attributes between elastic and inelastic. Okay, so I redrew what we talked about prior in terms of elastic is defined as price elasticity demand. If it's one or greater than one, then in fact it's elastic. If it's less than one, then it's said to be inelastic. And actually, if it comes out to exactly one, that's said to be unit elastic. And we may talk about that here in a little bit. But yeah, exactly one is, a 10% change in price yields a 10% change in the quantity demanded. That would be unit elastic. But again, some other ways of understanding elastic and inelastic. So we talked about if it's a necessity. So necessity, then again, you don't really have a choice, right? You need it. I think in the last video I used the idea of gasoline. You got to have it, got to get to work. Another example might be medicine, right? If you're asthmatic, then you need the little tube, right? And it doesn't matter if the price of that goes up, you still need to have it. Versus elastic. And some textbooks talk about luxury here, but I don't like that. I'm going to put non-necessity. And the reason I'm putting non-necessity versus luxury is that a luxury item, that makes sense if you're a normal sort of middle class, family or household, because luxuries for sort of middle class households are non-essentials. So maybe I want a new pellet smoker, pellet grill, but the price goes up, and so I opt not to do it. But for the very rich, those top 1% or top 1% of 1%, luxury becomes confusing because they are price sensitive. So if you think about it this way, Zuckerberg, right? He doesn't care what the price of anything is. If he wants it, he buys it. And so it gets a little murky that way. That's why I'm not using the term luxury. Another thing, though, if there's lots of substitutes, right? If there's lots of subs, so many substitutes, then that tends to make things elastic because, again, it makes you price sensitive. So in other words, if you think about soft drinks, Coke, Pepsi, Dr. Pepper, Mountain Dew, I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different types of soft drinks. So if the price of one soft drink goes up, it tends to be elastic because you'll just, you'll buy something else, right? If there's few subs, that's a U, not an A, then again, things tend to be inelastic. Another thing we can talk about is time. So over time, if you look at a time horizon or time scale, so things in the short term tend to be inelastic. I mentioned the price of gas. Let's say it really went up. Let's say the price of gas went from $1.89 a gallon to $5 a gallon. That's a pretty steep change in price. Immediately in the short run, the next day, the next week, the next month, personally, like in my case, I wouldn't have any choice. I'd have to buy that gas because I'd have to get to work and have to get to school and things like that. But in the long run, if the price of gas stayed at $5 a gallon, I might substitute some other choice, and I become more elastic in the long run because I may choose to, ride a bike or ride the bus or ride a horse, something like that. But long term, things tend to be elastic. Also, as a percent of budget. So, if it's a big part of your budget, you tend, again, to be price sensitive and to be elastic. Like probably the biggest percent of your budget in terms of your expenditures, your personal expenditures, is probably your rent, right? So if your landlord came up and said, hey, your rent's going to go up by 10%, that's a big chunk. 10% of that big chunk of your budget is a lot of cash, right? So you'd probably look for a new place to stay, to live. But if ice cream cones, so if it's a small percent of your budget, then you tend to be not price sensitive, and you tend to be more inelastic. So in other words, if the price of an ice cream cone goes from $2 to $2.10, you don't even think about that, right? So you tend to be more inelastic in the smaller percent of budgets. Let's talk briefly about what a perfectly elastic curve would look like. So if you think about it now, a change in price. So if we make this price and we make this quantity, right? A change in price, if you were ultimately price sensitive, that means you would only pay one price for something, right? And if this is your price right here, and that's the only price that a consumer is willing to pay for it, then a perfectly elastic demand curve would look like that. Any price above it or below it, not willing to pay. And that's what a perfectly elastic demand curve looks like. A perfectly inelastic curve is the opposite. So a perfectly inelastic is, it doesn't matter what the price is, I have to have that, would look like this. And the way to kind of remember that, if you're a student and you may see this on an exam or something, is that what's that kind of look like? Well, it kind of looks like an E, so it's perfectly elastic. And then what's that kind of look like? Especially if I put a little dot right there, right? That kind of looks like an I for inelastic. So those are some more of the attributes of elastic and inelastic. Let's now turn our attention to calculating price elasticity of demand. Before, in the first video, I kind of gave you a quick example of what the change in price, percent change in price, and a percent change in the quantity demanded. But if you actually had to calculate it using something called the midpoint formula, this is what the midpoint formula looks like. So midpoint formula, and again, it's the same basic structure, right? Percent change in quantity demanded over percent change in price in absolute terms. If we expand this, then this is what it looks like. This is what the full equation looks like. So it would be quantity 2 minus quantity 1, quantity 1 plus quantity 2 divided by 2, and the parentheses are important. Remember PEMDAS from like 8th grade, parentheses first, right? So this is just the expanded version of what percent change in quantity demanded. And then over that, we have the exact same structure, but for price. So P2 minus P1 over, I'm not minding my P's and Q's. P1 plus P2, 2. There we go. Okay, so an example would be, given if the price of hamburgers at $5 a pop is 25,000, and the price goes up to $6, and the quantity demanded goes down to 2,000, then what is the price elasticity of demand? So what I'll do is I'll stop the video, and then I'll just run through a quick example of that in the next video.